Welcome to the Higgins House and my mommy's podcast.
Hey, you guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Higgins House. I am so excited to invite my friend Joni to the show. Joni is a life coach who I found her Instagram, and I was so excited because I learned all about breath work and trauma responses and human design and all of that just by I stalked her highlights on her page. And so I'm so excited to have her here and welcome her to kind of talk about trauma response and as it pertains to us as parents and moms. So Joni, welcome to the Higgins House.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, welcome. Yes, I'm so excited for you to be here.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm glad you asked me.
There we go. Okay, hold on. So let's talk a little bit about first, just kind of tell us about you and how you got into all of this and your passions and all that kind of stuff.
Me.
I know that's a big one.
What about me? Well, I think the most important thing that I can say about me is that I'm just like every other person who's been through a lot of trauma. And I realized at some point along the way that it just could not be for nothing. It had to have a purpose. There was just no way that I was going to come to the earth and live this life and not somehow use the experiences to help other people through. Mm-hmm. So my initial work was in birth work, and I became a nurse, and I was a hospice nurse. And then I took a break from nursing to raise kids and started freelance writing. And that sort of just opened up a whole world of new opportunity for me. I'm a lifelong learner, and I love to just investigate different modalities. So I've settled on a few that really work for me. I really, really love human design. It's most people haven't heard of it. It's a really unique system.
Tell us kind of what that is, because I had to
I'll
look
give
it
you
up.
I'll give you a quick overview. It's basically it's sort of an amalgamation of a few different systems, including there's some astrology elements in there. There's elements of the I Ching. The I Ching is, a lot of people don't know what the I Ching is. It's the oldest recorded document. It's a 5,000-year-old divination system used by the Chinese. And what's crazy about the I Ching is it actually, the numbers and the way that it's set up actually mirrors the human genome. Exactly.
Interesting.
So that's one of those things. It's like, right?
That gets your wheels turning. Yeah.
Yeah. How did that work out? So there's I Ching elements in there. There's some elements of the chakra system in there and elements of Kabbalah in there. And when you put them all together using your birth date, time, and location, you essentially come up with something that I call the soul subway map, trademark, copyright. It's an energetic map of your body that shows the places where you magnetize other people to you. And it really gives you an incredible insight into what you're here on the earth to do. It's the most useful tool that I've ever. And I am, and I am a scientist through and through. I'm a nurse, and I'm medicine, and research is important to me. But when I found human design, and I found it after my mom died, and my mom was an addict. She had bipolar disorder. She took her own life. And when I saw her chart, her whole life made sense to me.
All the puzzle pieces came together.
Yeah, all the pieces came immediately. It was like, oh my gosh, I get it. 100% why she had the life she did. And what's really interesting is then I ran her brother. She has several siblings, but she has one brother that also struggles with addiction and mental health issues. And so I was interested to see what his chart looked like, and it's hers almost exactly.
Wow.
Same chart.
Interesting.
Yeah. So human design has become a big part of what I do to help people kind of get on the path. One of the cool things about human design is it can kind of explain to you some of the stuff that might be happening in your life that feels very confusing. These moments of like what I would call disruption. For example, my house burning down.
Yes.
And now, and then me losing everything, being burned. losing my mind, essentially.
You went through some significant physical and I would assume mental.
Yeah,
I mean, just
absolutely.
everything.
Mm-hmm. And then I went into treatment, into PTSD treatment inpatient for 6 weeks, and came out and found out that my husband wanted a divorce, and I wasn't ready for that. But
Yeah.
I can look at my human design chart and I can see why it's happening, and so that does provide a measure of peace. So there's that.
Yeah. It's almost like getting closure in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't answer all the questions, I would imagine, but it kind of helps bring some things into perspective. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It creates a map for you that makes everything sort of add up. And it's really incredible. So I utilize that.
About that.
Yeah, we'll do that. I utilize a type of breath work called transformational breath work. It's a very particular type of breath work that intentionally activates your sympathetic nervous system in a safe space. I don't have, like, my personal opinion of how this works. There's not scientific data to show this, but this is just what I think. Mm-hmm. I think when we experience a trauma, we hold it in our body and we store it right here, especially grief. And we can't release it because our bodies want to protect us from pain. Mm-hmm. So this type of breath work allows you to activate your sympathetic nervous system and release those traumas in a controlled environment where you have someone supporting you and guiding you through it so that you're not just on your own. And it can be super transformational for healing. Yeah. The thing about it is that if you think about trauma, particularly childhood trauma, most of us don't remember anything before age 4. Guess what? Trauma still happens.
Your body and your brain still remember those things. Yes.
And the thing is that if your trauma happened when you were pre-verbal, guess what? You can't talk it out.
Yeah.
You can't talk it out. You have to feel it out because you didn't have words to put to it at that time. You can't put words to it now. You have to feel it out. And the only way to do that is through somatic therapy. And one of those ways is breath work. So I love that. Yeah. And I do life coaching and sort of utilize all of those elements in there. And I've just really focused a lot on trauma because that's really a lot of where my own history is.
Yeah. And so just going off of that, let's talk about, so you and I were talking earlier about the kind of the definition of trauma. And obviously you can Google the definition of trauma, but you'll find a lot of different explanations or definitions. And so kind of talk with us about your definition. And then I know you have big T, little t trauma. Kind of tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, there's a few things to remember about trauma. The first thing is that trauma is not the thing that happened to you. Trauma is not the fire. Trauma is not the abuse. Trauma is not your parents telling you you're a worthless piece of garbage. Trauma is what happens in response to that event. That's the trauma.
How it made you feel from a result of it.
Right. And then as a result of that, the coping mechanisms that you develop to manage that trauma. And there's so many different systems and ways to look at this. There's internal family systems. There's DBT, CBT, REBT, like there's all different systems.
All the letters.
Right. There's so many lenses to look through trauma at. But I think the most useful lens is the one that just simply says that trauma is individual to the person. It doesn't matter what other people's experience of the trauma is. It doesn't matter what their recollection of the trauma is. You can take 3 people who witness a traumatic event, and their 3 stories will be different because we always evaluate everything through our own lens of experience in the world. You can take 4 kids in a family, 5 kids, 6 kids, and every single one of those kids will have a different experience of their childhood because they're viewing it through their own lens. And they each get a different parent too, right? So the important thing to know about trauma is that a lot of people don't think that they've experienced trauma because they don't have some sentinel event that happened. You know, their house didn't burn down, for example. But the thing is that little t traumas, playground bullying, that can also actually be a big T trauma too. But your parents praising you only for your grades. Those are also traumas. And they do a little T trauma repeated does more damage than a big T trauma. And I'll tell you how I know that, because I went through the most traumatic experience. My house burned down and I was in it. And I'm fine about the house. The reason is because I immediately managed it. I handled it. I did ketamine therapy. I did EMDR. I right away took care of it. Your body can clear it out. It's right there.
You had all the
small things that happen to you that add up, the things that you don't even recognize. And the thing is, as parents, we can do our very, 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 very best. And our kids are still going to be traumatized. Because the simple fact is, kids have needs that need to be met at a rate that parents can't meet them.
Yeah.
And that's a micro trauma. A crying baby is a micro trauma.
And that's what's so terrifying as a mom of 3, and Zane is 4, he'll be 5 in March, Benjamin is 2, and Lainey Kate is 8 months old. And it's like, dear God, they're all in that phase of don't ruin them, like, which is terrifying.
I mean, the good news is kids are resilient.
Yes, they are.
And the other good news is we now know, right? We know so much about the way the body stores trauma, and we know so much about how to manage trauma that we can intervene earlier. Like if you look at my kids, and I have one out of my 5 has bipolar disorder, and my mom died of bipolar disorder, essentially. I was undiagnosed and unmedicated for the first 38 years of my life, even though I was experiencing bipolar, all the things. My son was diagnosed and medicated at 18. Right? So he skipped all of those years of mood swings that screw up his life and leave him going, what did I do? I ran up all my credit cards. I'm broke. I cheated on my girlfriend. I wrecked my car, whatever. So we're getting better and better and better and better at it. Not only just recognizing what traumas are, but managing them as they come up, and then really helping our kids through them. And as a parent, your kids don't expect you to be perfect, and they really don't. My kids have never been like, you ruined us, Yeah. I apologized.
Well, and it's interesting because I listen to all kinds of podcasts, and one of the ones I listened to recently, it was Jodie Sweeney from Full House. Stephanie Tanner was talking about how her therapist was telling her, it's okay to vocalize that you didn't get something from your parents that you needed, even though it wasn't an abusive situation, or it doesn't make them bad parents. It made them learning parents. And it's just like you said, every kid gets a different parent, even though they have the same parents. Like our oldest Berkeley, she's 12, and her parents were very young when they had her. And then Zane was my first, and I had a year of undiagnosed postpartum, and so that was its own trauma. And then Benjamin, I kind of figured it out. So then Benjamin got a different mom, and then so on and so forth. And so it's really interesting how it all.
Yeah, and every kid is different. And you can think you have it figured out, and then not.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can think, I got this down, and then not, and then realize that you don't. And what's really weird and ironic is one of the things that I learned when I was in treatment about myself, one of the big light bulb aha moments was my younger kids. I have 5 kids, 28, 24, 23, 12, and 10. Those 3 older kids are from my first marriage, and the 2 younger ones are from my second marriage. Those 3 older kids that got the inexperienced mom who had undiagnosed, unmedicated bipolar disorder have less trauma than my younger kids do. And here's why.
I was about to say, and why is that?
Because of my trauma responses. So let me lay it out for you, right?
Yeah.
The best way for human beings to manage trauma, let's say, for example, you went to the Amazon and you came upon a group of people that were not in contact with the outside world, and something traumatic happened. Some big event. There was people died, whatever. There was a fire. You would see that the way that these indigenous people handle things like that as a community, and you would see that healing. You would see how the community comes around the traumatized person, how they minister and administer to them, how they use whatever remedies, medicines, whatever, psychedelics even, how they use rhythm, how important rhythm is for regulating our nervous systems, right? And you would see that healing happens in those communities without the assistance of medication, psychiatrists, because they just innately know what to do. We've lost our connection, and human connection is the way that we most actively regulate our nervous systems and thus manage and recover from trauma. So in my first marriage, I married my high school sweetheart, who was like the most even keel person on the planet. The man is like, still to this day, he's like a flat line. He's like, boop, every now and then, little one, boop. He never was mad.
Like my husband.
Never yelled. He never said anything mean to me. Our marriage was kind of lifeless. But also, he had a big family, and his family was my family. Now, my mom was an addict, right? Then my dad was not around.
Yeah.
His family, his mom was my mom, his dad was my dad, his sisters are my sisters. I walked into this huge nuclear family, and we were Mormon. So we had a huge network of people at church.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we went to every single week. And those people were regulated. So my dysregulated nervous system from childhood trauma was mirroring off of the neurons of everybody around me. Then I had a manic episode, and I left him. And when I left him, I had already left the church. He and I had left the church together. But when I left him, and when you leave the Mormon church, it's social suicide. You lose everything. You lose all your friends. It's over. You're done. Period. So I lost all my friends. And then I lost his family. And then I lost him. And then I married a man that was not the yang to my yin. He was the yin to my yin, or the yang to my yang. And he has a lot of anxiety. And his anxiety, and he is probably OCD, I don't know. But the way that his trauma, if you look at it through a lens of internal family systems, where you have like these parts of you that come to the rescue to protect you, right? What they call the firefighters. Yes. If you look at it that way, and the firefighters are coming in, right? He had all these firefighters coming in. And so what was happening? My firefighters were coming in, or my managers,
which were battle.
Right. Yeah. And there's a battle. And there's a battle. And guess what? There's no winner. There's no winner. So what happened is I went from this environment to an environment where my nervous system was in a constant state of dysregulation, literally for 10 years. We would fight. And when you have trauma that's unresolved, your ability to get back to baseline is reduced. So a normal person, setting on the washing machine, a person whose nervous system is not dysregulated can experience a small trauma and go back. A car accident.
Recover.
That's not necessarily small trauma, but you know what I mean? They can re-regulate. They can have a disagreement with their spouse, and in 20 minutes or a half an hour or an hour, they're back to baseline. A person who's already at a level 7, who experiences the trauma that puts them at a 10, it's like the Richter scale. You're not going back. It takes me 4 days to regulate. And guess what? We were fighting more than every 4 days.
Yeah.
So my kids, even though on the outside, right, I was doing great.
Yeah.
Kids, 3 teenagers. I was going to all their events, all their things, showing up, breastfeeding, co-sleeping, nursing till they were 2.5, home birthing, all the right things, baby wearing, front and back, both of them. Like I went, I did it all. I did it all the best I could, but it didn't matter because your energy leaks out. The harder you push it down, the more it leaks out. And the less you release it, the more it has to go somewhere. And guess what? Your kids know.
Eventually, yeah.
So my kids grew up with, they don't know how to regulate their nervous systems because mine was never regulated. To this day, those 2 children cannot regulate their nervous systems. They're both in therapy. And I did that to them.
It's interesting that you say that now that I'm thinking back on my own situations, because so we've talked about this on previous episodes, and you and I talked about it earlier, and you said something that I literally have written in big bold letters to remember to bring up. So I am ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Have been all my life. Was not diagnosed until I was an adult. Have tried every route of everything until this year. Started medication and finally found something I was successful on and worked for me. Zane, my 4-year-old, we are fairly certain is also. However, what I'm learning over time, and ironically through this podcast, not just this one, but all episodes, is the number of times that I say, I have ruined relationships over time over not being able to just get over the little things or the stupid things to other people. Luckily, I married an extremely non-confrontational individual.
Nice.
who
Good
regularly is like, I wish I could just give you a little bit of my chill mode. And I'm like, yeah, you and me both, dude. But but then Zane will do something and just lose his ever loving mind, right? Like he's clearly dysregulated. And that is a huge trigger for me. It makes me so frustrated. But the irony is he is literally doing what I do in 4-year-old form. And so right now, our world apparently is in a shortage of my medication. We have recently learned. And so I have not had it since Friday, which is why I have all these things written down here.
Good choice.
To keep me on track.
Good executive function. Good job. Proud of
you. Yeah. Well, I told Tyler, I said, I did not realize how easily I became overstimulated or dysregulated, which I'm very familiar with working in the special education world. I'm familiar with it to everybody else. I had not really recognized and applied it to myself up to this point. And so now I'm quickly seeing things. And what I'm realizing is I have a hard time teaching Zane how to regulate because I have not quite learned how to regulate. But then I go to work and I'm actually a behavior specialist teaching special education students how to regulate and teaching their staff how to help them. And I'm really good at it there, but for whatever reason, I can't do it for myself and my kids.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a housekeeper's house?
Well, no, that's a good point though.
Yeah.
So how does that, when our kids, we've talked about this in previous episodes, I call it a trigger. I have some friends who say that word scares them to use, but my children trigger me. And there are certain things that my children do that really just make me lose my shit. And I have not figured out why yet. I know in working with my counselor, one of the things is she said, you have to realize the entire first year of Zane's life with undiagnosed postpartum, your brain was telling you all of his needs were a disservice. That was ruining your life, that you had to help him with that. And so I'm still like retraining my brain. My children need something that's not necessarily a bad thing, which is a really difficult thought to go through because by the end of the day, you're kind of like, okay, well, that makes you feel like a great parent, right? So what are some ways that we can recognize, I mean, obviously I know when my kid does something that annoys me or pisses me off, but when it is a true trigger that is maybe a trauma response from something when we were kids or, and how to kind of start recognizing those things so that we can better ourselves in parenting.
Well, the first thing that I want to say is that it's really worth looking into the work of Gabor Mate. His most recent book, which is called The Myth of Normal, is a great summary of many of his books, but he wrote a book called Scattered Minds. And his view of ADHD is that ADHD itself is a trauma response.
I'm glad
it's multi-generational.
That's also written down. I wanted you to talk about that.
It's multi-generational family stress. And the reason it develops is because children are trying to get their needs met, right? Human beings, our primary goal in life is to avoid pain first to survive. And if you have a parent that's mentally ill, an addict, depressed, whatever, what are you going to have to do to get that parent to meet your needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that might mean that you might need to be flexible to the parent's behaviors, which
Mm-hmm.
might mean that you're jumping around. I don't want to like delve too deeply into that, but it's worth looking into because it's a really useful explanation, I think.
Well, I
for
found it
ADHD.
really interesting when you mentioned it earlier, because one thing that everyone in my inner circle is aware of is I really lose my marbles when someone shushes me, and not like in a rude way, but like if somebody's like, "Hey, you're being really loud," or whatever, which happens frequently, I lose it. It is like my kaboom. And what I figured out over time later, it's that, or if I'm told to quit being dramatic, what that has taught, what I have learned, is those are things that were done to me as a child. And that's not to knock my parents. I probably would have shushed me too. But, every report card was that I talked too much. And here I am doing a podcast. And yes, exactly. And so, but it was turned into this negative, or she can't be still, or she can't do this, or she can't do that. And when that happens with Zane, like the other day, he's a wonderful teacher. She's incredible. And she's very flexible with him and his constant need to move. But he was dead set on wearing his cowboy boots the other day. And in his folder, it said that he's having a really hard time being still during nap time, which he never takes a nap. So, this is common. And I asked him, and he says, well, it's just that my boots are a bit noisy. And I was like, are you tapping them? And he was like,
are you knocking them on the floor?
Well, yeah. Are you? And he was like, well, yeah. And I was like, okay, so they are noisy, but maybe it's because we're making them that way.
Right.
But so she's wonderful in giving him that flexibility. And it's something that I don't have a lot of memory of my educators. I remember fourth grade because we moved in fourth grade right in the middle of the school year. So I have vivid memories from about that point on. But it always makes me wonder about my educators prior to that. And obviously my parents too. But let's face it, where are you if you're in public education for the vast majority of your life? You're in class.
Yeah. And let's for just a moment divert to discuss public education, because the thing about public education is that public education was not designed to educate children. That was not its purpose. Public education was designed to create industrial workers when America became an industrialized nation. It was designed to create people who are obedient. And the trouble with that is that highly intellectual people are almost never obedient.
Yeah.
Because their brains do not want them to sit still.
They don't think that way.
No. And as time goes on, right, and we see more and more neurodiversity, what we call neurodiversity, right? This neurological diversity is an anthropological developmental change that's happening in our world because we need new ways of thinking. Because we're going to die as a species if we don't figure stuff out. We're going to overpopulate the planet. We've got nowhere to go. We need people like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is that public education, while it is so necessary, I mean, then I get into capitalism and we can't go. But it's so necessary, right? Because people have to work and pay their bills.
Yes. Well, and there's a huge handful of teachers too that you hear. I'm in education because of this teacher who was wonderful to me and did all this, and I strive to be that to these kids. Or you get, I'm here to not be that teacher from fourth grade to those kids.
Oddly enough, my fourth grade teacher was terrible. Also, she was terrible.
I didn't love my one particular. I had multiple. My fifth grade teacher though. Shout out to Miss Kirk. Miss Kirk raised.
I mean, we run into those teachers that really see us and help us. I had a couple of those. I had my German teacher in high school was one of those people who really saw me for who I was and refused to let me fail on, just because I was afraid, because I moved to a new high school. But, also, side note, we need to do your human design, because your human design will probably tell me why you feel this thing with the being shushed, because this happens a lot with certain types of people in human design. They get shushed a lot. And it can be really interesting to look at your kids compared to you, because the way that you energetically interact can be one of the reasons why he triggers you. There can be an energetic connection there that's a trigger. The other thing is that our kids reflect back to us so much of what we are.
He is a walking Andrea, I'll tell you that.
And what is it really in you that's triggered? What's in you that's triggered is probably, I don't know how to raise this kid.
Absolutely.
And so what's triggered in you isn't about you as much as it is about your fear of failure, or your fear of being unable to do what your parents were also unable to do, or your teachers were unable to do, or it's that cycle of, holy shit, you've just put something in my lap that I can't manage. And I don't know.
And you did not sit at home with a manual. You just put it there and said, keep it alive.
No, you gave me no instruction. You just said, yes, keep me alive and don't put me outside in the cold. Like, our kids are going to trigger us in so many ways. They can trigger us because, I have a kid who triggers me because she acts like my mom. She says things to me that my mom would say to me. And I'm that's a whole thing right there. But there's so many different ways our kids can trigger us. And I think one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to show yourself grace. Like, literally just be like, okay, dude, nobody, first of all, a lot of people aren't talking about it because they don't want to say it. Right. But most of us don't know what we're doing.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And we're lost around here. Yeah, they're probably faking it. Or, I wrote parenting columns for years, and still I'm like, hey, I'm just figuring it out. The only thing I have on you is I've done it longer. And I had I had more kids or whatever. But, your kids are going to bring out those things in you, all the hardest parts, because they're calling you out to heal yourself too. I really do think that our kids are a gift to us in that way, where you can look at Zane, you can change that perspective, right? And you can look at Zane as Andrea. Okay, Zane is Andrea. And I'm pushing little Andrea away because I don't want to accept that about her. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to know. I don't want to acknowledge that she wasn't heard. I don't want to think about the pain I felt as a child because people told me to be quiet. I'm pushing her away. And then Zane steps in as Andrea. And what does your body want to do? It wants you to avoid that pain. It doesn't want to go there. It doesn't want to feel it. It doesn't even want to look at it. Meanwhile, little Andrea is in here going, hi, excuse me.
I'm still here.
You're still telling me to be quiet. Hello. Shh. And you're like, be quiet, Andrea.
I'm sorry. There are so many family VHS recorded videos out there in the world of them videotaping somebody else and me in the background going, hey, hi, I'm over here. Well, and Zane is the emotional side of it, and Benjamin is the stubborn side of it. I was the kid that if I was told not to do it, I did it. If I was told we don't do that, I tested it. I went to figure out why. And Benjamin is the just look you dead in the face and go, no, not doing that. And is even in the last month, he is the final straw of trying to figure out, like, why doesn't this work on you? Like, and I don't want to be a parent that, and I say this loosely, but it's really easy to go, if you don't do that, you're not going to get this. I don't want you to make a decision out of fear, right? But for whatever reason, it's like I'm a yeller parent, not what I want to be, but I am. I'm quick to snap. When I first started with Berkeley was 5 when we got married, I guess 12 now. And we went on a vacation once, and I don't remember if my mom and my sister said something to the regard of it's okay, like it's fine that she does that. And I guess they thought that I was being nitpicky, and I am later now that I look back. But I kept thinking, okay, but why am I nitpicky to her? Like, I'm nitpicky to her for a reason. There's something there. But it's very interesting when we allow ourselves, because I think we hide from it. when we allow ourselves to look back on our lives, when we feel like we don't have big T traumas. I wasn't abused. I wasn't this. I didn't experience divorce. I didn't, XYZ. I didn't experience that. Your little T traumas are still there, and identifying those, I think, is what kind of opens the door to allow us to translate ourselves sometimes.
Yeah,
if that makes
sense. And
I
hear it. And I mean, how long have we been on this call? It's half an hour, and I can tell you right now that your trauma is that you felt unheard. And why do you have a podcast? People will hear you, right? Yeah. I mean, it's literally, and we vilify that. And I'm the same way, so I get it.
Yeah. And it's literally in the definition. It's literally in the definition of the podcast. The very first line is that we want moms to feel understood and to feel heard, that they are not by themselves. That when you wake up and you think, my kid is a jerk today, it's okay to say that out loud. And you're not the only one in the world that feels that way. But for whatever reason, we don't do that for moms. We don't do that for each other.
Because we don't want to do that, because we feel we've been trained. It's like the mother wound of like, you're supposed to respect your mom. We have this thing where we don't want to say bad things about our moms. We don't want to say bad things about our kids, because we feel like if we say, I regret this, like it's just going to be taken from us. Like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose it. I wrote an article once about regretting having kids. And people were like, your kids are going to read this. And I was like, okay, fine. Guess what? My kids are going to have kids, and they're probably going to regret it too. Like, there's times in your life where
there will come a time
you're going to look around and go, what did I do? Oh my gosh. And that's okay. And where we get into trouble is when we say those feelings aren't okay. And we start making people feel bad for them, because then they compress them. And what happens to a compressed feeling? A feeling wants to be heard. So the harder you push it down,
eventually,
the harder it punches back at you. It's okay. It is okay to look at your kids and say, you are being a jerk. Like literally, you can, it is okay, because they are jerks sometimes. And parenting is the hardest thing you will ever do. If you did not at some point during your parenting journey look at your kids and go, why did I do this? I would question you, honestly. I would be like,
I have more questions for you.
Right. Exactly. Because that's the reality. The reality is that this is a hard road, and you haven't traveled it, and you're walking it without a map. So the best you can hope for is that there's somebody up in front of you that's like, come this way, over here.
Yeah, I'm over here. I'm over here. It's probably me or you going, we're over here.
Turn left. Because it is hard. It is hard. And
then we are now in a world of social media, which can be beautiful and awesome and wonderful, but it can also be the world's worst ever.
Yes.
And, that was one of the first episodes we recorded, was with a dear friend of mine, and her son is autistic and ADHD. And she said, I would go to the doctor and I would literally start out by saying, please don't call CPS when I tell you like what we're dealing with him right now, or like what's happened, or like, he found a knife last week or whatever, and we get, later we were talking, and she said, I cannot tell you, after getting off of that, I realized that because I was on a podcast and nobody was looking at me, and I just felt safe to be able to say that. And that's wonderful. And then it went live, and it was like, I had 6 moms who were like, oh my gosh, thank God. Like, it's not just me. It's not, okay, other moms feel this way. Like, I'm not by myself. And I'm like, there's a ton of us. Like, there's a freaking lot of us.
Oh, I assure you.
We're all walking around playing Where's Waldo. Like,
whatever feeling you're having, there is another mom somewhere having that same feeling right now. I promise. I promise.
Yeah,
I have,
absolutely.
It's okay. It's okay that it's hard, and you can give yourself permission to say it's hard, and you can say you don't know what you're doing, and that's okay too. You don't have to. And guess what? You can do your best and mess up.
And
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And it's going to be okay. Because look, I have 3 grown kids. I have a grandchild now who's like the best thing ever. And when I watch my daughter mother this baby, I go, oh my God, I didn't ruin her.
She made it. She did it.
She survived. Not only did she survive, she's an incredible mother. Now that's not me, right? She's doing that. But clearly
But still,
I didn't.
Yeah.
They're all successful. All three of them are happy, well-adjusted, successful human beings who are having relationships with other people, who set boundaries, who have great self-care, who know how to ask for what they want, and they've done their own work. But also part of that was me saying, hey, I did my best. And there's some places where I know that I failed and I'm sorry. And finally, after a few years, my kids were like, can you stop apologizing? We know you're fine. It's okay.
We got it. Well, and I think
we're good, Mom.
Sometimes our world tells us like, oh, don't tell your child if they hurt your feelings, or that made me sad when. And while I understand the logic there, I also think it's important, like for me personally, I think it's important for Zane to know that that hurt my feelings. I think it's important for Zane to know that my heart was sad from what you said or did, and not to guilt them, but because in reality, 3 years from now, they're going to do it again. And they need to, or it's going to happen to them. And to create that sympathy or that empathy or whatever, the situation is. So how do you, social emotional learning? We came across Slumberkins. Don't know if you've ever heard of them. They were created by for those who don't know, they were created by, I believe she's a play therapist and then a special education teacher. We have them all. I bought them all. Every single freaking one, because they had a huge Black Friday sale and that's what they got for Christmas. But when I tell you that I find myself utilizing these stupid books, these board books that are clearly designed for young children, we'll be reading a book and there are times at the end of every book where your child repeats you. So, if Hammerhead the shark's trying to calm down, we are telling him what to say and they are repeating it. And it never fails. We get to the end and we're doing that. And I'm like, this is what, one, this should be curriculum in the schools. Two, if we ever choose to homeschool, this is our primary focus to start. But three, to just do that together. Like Zane thinks he's just repeating you, but to do that together, whether you use them or anything else for that matter, affirmations or whatever, it's very eye-opening and very therapeutic to do that with your children and to know that you are teaching them something productive.
Yes. And the thing is that we know.
I've got to grab my chart.
We know that kids will do what they see. They don't do what they're told. They do what they're shown. And if you want your kids to learn to regulate their emotions, you show them how to regulate your own. If you want your kids to be safe and okay with all the feelings that they're having, then you have to be willing to sit in your own feelings and say, I am sad. I am scared. I am worried. Of course, age appropriate, right? You're not going to talk to your kids about you can't pay your bills but you need to be willing to share your feelings with your child so that your child knows that there are no feelings that aren't acceptable. The big one that we don't want people to be angry. We don't like anger's bad. No, there's nothing wrong with anger. Anger is your body trying to fulfill a need, right? Anger is very often your body, you're fine, thinking that it needs to protect you, right? Absolutely. So we tell our kids, hey, guess what? It's okay to be angry. What's not okay is when you hit someone, right? Or when you, whatever. And you set that example of what healthy anger looks like, right? We talk about how to regulate those emotions. Again, we're mirroring, we're constantly in a state of mirroring everyone in our environment. This is why when you walk into a room, for those who are not familiar with mirror neurons, it's literally neurons from the people around you syncing up with yours. So when you walk into a room and you say, I like the vibes in here, that's mirror neurons. When you walk into a room and you have an icky feeling, that's also mirror neurons telling you get out, right? So if we want our kids to be learning how to manage their emotions, to be learning how to regulate their nervous system, we have to be doing it for ourselves. And it's never too late to do that. My younger kids are 10 and 12, and they learned with me how to activate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, which is the main nerve that runs down the center of your body. The activation of the vagus nerve activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of your fight or flight. That's your rest and digest. So if you want to activate your vagus nerve in a minute, all you have to do is breathe in through your nose for 4, hold it for 2, and exhale out of your mouth through pursed lips for 8. If you don't like 4, you can do 5 and 10, but the exhale needs to be twice as long as the inhale. And that stimulates the vagus nerve. You can also gargle. You can hum.
Isn't this gargling? Okay, wait, say that again. You can hum?
You can gargle. You can hum. You can sing. You can tap.
And what is this doing? Calming?
This is all activating your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve, it sends the signals to your brain to release all the calm hormones.
So my 2-year-old recently started humming like all the time.
Let him do it.
Like, and we just noticed over the weekend, and his teacher was like, because he's at daycare, and she was like, there's 8 other kids in the class. She was like, but now that you say that, yeah, he does hum a lot, and I never really knew why.
Well,
I assumed he was creating white noise for himself, to be really honest.
Our bodies know, and it's really interesting because we'll train those things out because it's not acceptable. One of the key things in human design is that there's one type that answers questions through their literally their body, right? And the answers come out as a sound, or Those kids who answered or were often told it's rude to say that.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. No,
and
ma'am.
then you've cut them off from the way they need to make decisions. Now you've got adults that can't make decisions because they can't say So our kids are inherently wise with what to do with their nervous systems.
Their body.
We train it out of them because it's not acceptable behavior. Think about stimming for autistic kids, rocking. What is that? That is nervous system regulation. Drumming, tapping.
Those kids constantly moving. Yes.
Shaking your leg. It's all rhythmic nervous system regulation. The use of stimulating the vagus nerve and knowing that skill is that when you find yourself activated, when you find yourself in a state of fight or flight, this just happened to me literally right before we got on the call. I had a disagreement with my husband dropping the child off. I came home dysregulated. I had an EMDR session with my therapist. And at the end of the session, we were not able to finish it out because my time was up. And I was like, I have 15 minutes before I need to get on this call. And I need to be a human being who can speak English. Understood. What am I going to do? My nervous system my heartbeat is 140 beats a minute. I am sweating. I feel like I'm going to throw up. What am I going to do? I'm going to utilize the skills I have to activate my vagus nerve. I'm going to do my breathing. I'm going to get something warm to drink because it runs down the center, right? I'm going to play some music while all this is going on, right? So I'm breathing, the music's playing, I'm making the drink, I'm dancing to the music. These are all nervous system regulation activities that get my nervous system back into balance or close, right?
When so these would be primary things.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, these would be primary things to remember when you're at the store and your kid is losing their mind or maybe they're not. Like for me, my kid's just being loud in the store, which the irony of the fact that I don't like being shushed now. My kid's just being loud in my thought process gets me so worked up.
Yep.
And they're really not. Like everybody's like, oh my gosh, they're so cute. And I'm like, I'm about to lose it.
And these
are things that can easily be done.
Anywhere. No one needs to know that you're counting 428 when you breathe. And when literally it became a joke in treatment because I taught this to everyone there and everyone when they graduated would be like 428. Because you can do it anywhere. You can do it anywhere. And it takes 1 minute. If you want to get
I had a panic.
Extra, you can do 2.
I had a panic attack at church once and still to this day don't know why, but thank God a dear friend of mine who is an LPC and specializes in trauma was there. And I literally went and got her out of the choir loft. My dad's a music minister. Out of the choir loft and was like, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what's happening. I had never had one before. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's wrong. I'm like sobbing in the audience. I don't know what's, I don't know. And we literally went into a closet with no light. And we did, I think she called it, it was basically what you're saying, but it was like 5 and 5. So we breathed in for 5, held it for 5, blew out for 5, did it 5 times. Yeah. Then she said, okay, when you're ready to go, and you go back, I want you to focus on your senses. So like pews in churches, they have that fun material, whatever the material is. So anytime I get that way, anytime I get that way, that's what I do. I rub, the seat or wherever I am, my sweater, my hair, whatever. And I just hyper focus on my senses, and that's what I hear, what I smell.
And that's ground.
And
grounding is another,
And that's what Zane comes home one day and he got mad about something and he goes, and he's like, and I was like, excuse me, what are you doing? Like, I'm here for it, but what are we doing? And he said, I'm box breathing. And I was like, okay, I'm here for that.
Fingers. You can do up and down your fingers like this. Kids, I mean, schools are getting better about teaching kids these interventions, but we don't necessarily know them, right? So we can't employ them.
There's a generational gap there. Yeah. And so that's what has been so interesting is I think we stopped going COVID happened, and so we really stopped going places.
Right.
But we stopped going places as moms because it's either I feel like I can't control the situation at hand, my children, whatever, or I'm going to panic the whole time I'm there. I have a friend of mine who the whole time she's out and about, she's in a full-fledged panic of where are my kids, where are my kids, where are my kids. I go and I almost don't have enough. Like Lady Kate was a week old and we loaded up all of my kids and went to Walmart and got groceries. And I drove the bus of a cart, with the 2 and the 1 and and by the time we left, I was so overstimulated and it was probably the last thing that I needed to do. But I was like, no, I can do that. I can do that.
No.
We have to eat. Like we convince ourselves like I have to do this when the reality is I probably could have waited an hour and gone later with like 1 kid. Like And we allow ourselves to believe we have to.
Yes. This is cultural. And I've talked about this before. It's this idea of suffering being somehow better. If we're suffering, I literally call it suffer culture. It's like the less sleep you get, the better. The more hours you work, the better. The more kids no, we need to stop that. We need to stop that. Your productivity and your
the
worth
more
as
I'm
a human,
home, the better. The more I do this, the better.
No. And we have to stop comparing ourselves to each other because we don't know. We have this window of tolerance, right? In our ability to handle stressors. And if you have a regulated nervous system, your window of tolerance might be quite wide. My window of tolerance is very narrow. It's widening, but it's very narrow. And so I was holding it together after the fire and I was doing okay, even through my injuries, even through the wound in my back that was open for months, even through all of that and the kids and the dog's dead and we can't build a house and we don't have enough insurance and the whole thing. And then one thing happened and I snapped. And my psych teacher in nursing school, bless her heart, good old Donna, she used to say when we were in the psych hospital, she would say, never forget, you are one crisis from admission. We are all one crisis. We just don't know which crisis it is.
Yeah.
And when I snapped, and I'm almost 50 years old, and I've managed my whole life up to this point without any inpatient mental health treatment. And my nervous system collapsed. I could not get up. There was no choice. I tried to take my life. I literally could not move. And I could very easily look around and say, look at all this person who went through this and they're fine. And look at that person who went through that and they're fine. And look at that. It doesn't matter because
my trauma is not real trauma or because it's not like theirs.
Yes. And that happens in treatment too. You'll have people in a room that are all there for different types of trauma. And they'll be like, oh, I don't deserve to be here because my trauma is not as bad as yours. It doesn't matter because it's all relative. It's like having one, when people say, oh, wait till you have 3 kids. Guess what? If you don't only have 1 kid, 1 kid's hard. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you have 2, 2's hard. Okay?
It's hard times 2. It's just,
You can't look at a mom who has 1 kid and go, wait till you have 2, because guess what? She's never had 2, so she doesn't know. 1 is hard. That's the thing to remember, is that all of our experiences in life are relative, and you cannot judge a person's ability to get through their day based on what you see right here, because you just don't know. And you're like, what happened to you that day in church with the panic attack? It's very likely that something occurred that triggered that flight or fight response in you that ignited a trauma that you don't remember. A smell, a sound, a song. Who knows? Who knows? It's not to be explained. It's really not. It's only to be managed. When we start trying to get into, well, I have to understand why this is happening and I need to, nope, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that it is happening.
And how to
that
support
you have
yourself
the
in it.
You need to get through it.
So last question, what would be, for those of us with spouses or whether single parent or not, whoever that support person is, married, not, so my husband is constantly trying to figure out, what do I do? How can our support people, whoever that person is, spouse, sister, friend, how can they be most helpful to us? And because sometimes we don't know.
No.
Sometimes I can tell you, but most of the time we don't know. But we have these people in our lives who want so badly to help us. And that day Tyler was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. And he didn't know how to help me.
And
it wasn't until a doctor said, these are the things we're looking for. And if these things happen, it's serious and we need to move forward. And Tyler was like, oh, I need to be watching for that. This is where we're at in this. And so how can we kind of educate those who want to help?
So there's a couple of things. The first thing is that, I'll tell you, I had a panic attack last week. The night I came home from California. I had been away from my partner, who I know that I'm divorcing. And when I saw him, I lost it. I went to my office to be alone, and it continued to devolve. I went into fight or flight. I started breaking things. I was completely out of control, and then I couldn't breathe and I was on the floor. And he was like, I don't know what to do for you. So he went and got my daughter, my oldest daughter, who thankfully she's a doula. So the thing is that these are conversations to have before the panic happens. If it's happened already, right? If it's happened once and you know that there's a thing, right? These are the symptoms to watch for. And these are the interventions to take. And if nothing else, if the person can do nothing for you, they can get an ice pack and put it on your chest, which will just change the nervous system response. They can put a cold rag on you. They can put your hands in cold water. They can get right in your face and breathe with you. Inhale 4, exhale 8. Inhale 4, exhale 8. Activate that. If you can't do that, if that's too complicated, just breathe in and out. When Kelsey came in, she literally was just like, I was like, and she was like, just breathe. Look at my face and breathe, right?
I've always heard that breathing is contagious, like a yawn or something like that, that if you will do that while holding your child when they're in like a fit or struggling, that you doing it in turn is contagious.
Yes.
I always wondered if that was true.
You're right. It is. And the other thing is, if you're counting, your mind is shifting, right? You're putting your mind into a different state. This is one of the reasons that Lamaze works, because you're putting your mind into a different state. If you're counting your breath, your mind has to go to it needs to go to your right brain. And so you're just routing the pathways differently. So the combination of stimulating just any change in the nervous system, right? Ice, warmth, cold rag, whatever, the breathing, like all of those things will eventually come together. And then I think another really helpful thing is to have going in a sort of a mantra for me, through this experience of the divorce, which has been a very serious activation of my nervous system, because it was a rug ripped out from under me that I didn't expect, on top of a lot of other trauma. And so I have spent a lot of the last couple of months in fight or flight. So one of the most important things for me is to know I'm going to be okay. And so my daughter can say to me, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Or whatever it is. This is going to pass.
And see, for me, Tyler has to say, you are safe. Because
safe.
If you tell me you're okay, I'm like, I am. Like, it just makes me more mad almost. And so we have had to find over time that is different for everybody. Everybody has a different statement, because for somebody to be able to say you are okay works great for you. For me, I'm like, you want to bet? Like, I've got all these things that are proving otherwise. And so I think that is.
I mean, some of them are, that's going to be exclusive to the situation, but telling someone they're safe and telling someone they're okay, they're not going to die, because a lot of times that's what panic is.
It feels like that. Absolutely.
So you are able to breathe. You are breathing. And a lot of times when people are in panic, they'll say, I'm not, I can't.
But you are, because you're talking.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yes, I remember that through all of Benjamin.
I had a woman once who strangled me while she was in labor. She took my stethoscope and just like around my neck. And she was like, you don't know what this feels like. And I was like, oh, I do. And that was the way we
done it this many times.
Just said, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, over and over and over again. So sometimes you have to figure it out. But these are things to do ahead of time, right? So that when the crisis occurs, you're prepared. And then I think I would be remiss if I didn't include, if someone ever expresses a desire to no longer exist or to end their life, that is not something to be toyed with. You manage that. And you do so immediately. And you note, a lot of people don't understand that people will rehearse suicide. And it's important to know what you're looking for to protect your loved ones, because when you are suicidal, your brain is not giving you accurate information. You are believing what your brain is telling you, which is whatever that story is at the moment. And that's when people make.
We talked about that on one of the first episodes, about how I never made a plan, but in my postpartum time, I constantly was like, okay, but see, if I was gone right now, like Tyler could do this, Tyler would be fine. I don't need to be here. And I never had this rehearsed or thought out plan. And it took me at least 6 months to tell my counselor, because I was like, she's going to flip out and I'm going to get put in a home. Like I didn't want to tell anybody, but we shared that. And I've had multiple people reach out that said, I don't even have kids. Like I don't even have kids. And I'm listening to the podcast and I 100% know that feeling. Like I don't want to not be here, but I definitely want to know what it would be like if I wasn't. And so I think it's so important that, parent or not, if you're listening to this, these are tools to keep in your, like, download the episode, save it on your phone, because these are incredible tools to help you through moments like that, and then share that with your person, your support, your whomever, so that they can help you too.
And it's important to really build, I think, if you're a person who's struggling with mental health, you really do need to have a life raft. And that life raft needs to include more than just your partner. Your support system is more than just your partner. It needs to be wider than that, because one person isn't enough.
Hold it all.
Right. You need to have tools in your toolbox, and you need to have people on your side, and you need to know who those people are, so that when things get rough, you know who to call. And it's not like, well, what do I do now? Where do I go?
Which then just pretty much causes more panic. Let's be honest.
Right. So having that stuff worked out ahead of time so that you have it. I mean, I carry it around with me. It's an intervention. It's a little notebook. And because I can't always remember what I want to do, I have this. It says the list of things to remember, and it's 428, meditation, essential oils, find a rock, put your feet in the grass, remember the 4 agreements, do EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's literally just pages and pages and pages of things that I know that I can call on when I can't remember.
Yeah.
Because when I like to think of the brain as like a stoplight, it's like green, yellow, red, right? The green is our thinking brain. This is our logical mind, emotion, reason. Yellow is when we're starting to go into, we're getting into just function, right? Like I need to make a decision. I'm in danger. And then red brain is lizard. It's literally just survive, right? When you are not in your green brain, anytime you're out of your green brain, you cannot learn anything new. You cannot process anything new. And you often can't remember anything. So you know you're going into your green brain or your yellow brain because everybody has a thing. They know when their nervous system, you just feel it. It's in your body somewhere. It's a this, it's a click, it's a stomach ache, it's a, and you go, uh-oh, it's coming.
Yep.
You're on your way out of your logical mind. Have something at hand that helps put you back into your logical mind, or at the very least reminds you of the things that your logical mind knows that this part of your brain doesn't remember. Because you can't.
Yeah.
You literally can't.
I'm making a journal.
I mean,
I know what I'm doing
tiny,
tonight.
It's just a tiny notebook. And
Yeah.
I just, every time I think of something new, I write in it. And I'll write Elton laughing, or I'll write YouTube, Google kittens, or whatever.
Yeah.
Because there are tools that you forget exist because you're not thinking. Like, I know I'm trained in EFT and I've taught EFT and done EFT with bunches and bunches of people, and I forget that it exists.
Or how to do
and
it
it's
for
as
that matter.
easy as literally tapping these meridian points and doing it's so fast and easy and so effective. But I forget, right? Even that's why I think it's so important to have something really simple like a breath work practice like the 428 or gargling that you can go to when nothing else is
can
working.
Come to you.
And then you can move your way through those other interventions to get yourself balanced out once you've got at least somewhat of a hold on your mental, on your nervous system. So you're not completely off the rails, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your things. I'll make sure that Joni's Instagram and all the things are in the show notes. I do encourage you, if you heard anything that you did not know what that was or anything along those lines, everything that she covered is literally in a highlight somewhere on her page. I have gone through them all. And they're very enlightening, very educational, and very helpful. And so I am just so glad that you were able to join us. Who knew? Y'all give me a hard time about my trim and my collagen, but guess what? That's how I found Joni. So I am so grateful for you being here, and I hope that this reaches lots of people that need to learn these techniques. And we had a little bit of technical difficulties there at the end, but I just wanted to close out by saying a huge thank you to Joni for being on the show, for giving us all of her information. I will leave her Instagram and all of the things in the show notes. If you are struggling in any way, shape, or form with mental health, with finding resources and ways to bring yourself back to a state of calm, I would heavily, heavily encourage you to check out her page, Joni Edelman. And like I said, I will share it in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm so, so excited to get this one out there for y'all. And we will see you again on Monday.